So the start in Vegas is pretty tricky. It's low grip, low downforce, and it's a temporary surface, of course. But this year, it was a little bit more managed by the drivers. There's a couple of moments. The first one is at the front of the race. Charles Leclerc is going to sneak through into second place. So we have, after qualifying, an Alpine in the top three. And Gasly actually gets a good start. He's coming to the outside of Carlos Sainz here. Russell's managed this one perfectly from pole. And then you've got 2 by 2 just behind. So Gasly attacking Sainz, and then Verstappen coming around the outside of Leclerc as well. Norris not getting a great getaway. He's got Tsunoda next to him. But as they come through, Sainz has to cover off Pierre Gasly on the outside. And what it means is he comes in quite deep and just ushers Gasly wide. But Leclerc, behind them, is just able to measure his own braking point, which allows him to get right on the apex curb and take that inside line on the way out, sneak past his teammate and up into second place. It's a really nice move, well thought out by Charles Leclerc. We can see this again if we jump on board with the Ferrari man, who now is in a great position to try and fight for the race win. Here we go, on board with Charles. It's a fairly standard getaway from him. Russell launches away. Everyone else is fairly equal away. But now Sainz has had to go in deep enough on the brakes to stop Gasly sweeping around the outside in an Alpine that had pretty good straight line speed. And they didn't think it'd be that easy to pass in the rest of the race. And that means that we get to an apex and Sainz is actually nowhere near being able to make the apex. Now, it's absolutely fine, acceptable driving. He's leaving plenty of space for Gasly still on the outside. But what he does do is just leave this inside line for Leclerc to get right to that curb as we play it forward, onto the curb, and then just straighten up the car as much as possible, fighting it so much on the rear end as well. And from this position, he can turn in unimpeded into to second place in the Grand Prix. And with Ferrari, the pre-race favourites, that could have been a really critical move. The other one further back is the Verstappen positioning at the first corner, which is actually quite risky for Max. He doesn't often start on the outside, but he likes to get to the inside, as we know from recent races. But this time he's got no choice. The Ferraris are muscling him out. He's from 5th place on the grid, and he stays there. And we have Lando Norris in the McLaren, posing a bit of a threat now, coming down the inside. Remember, this is championship on the line for Norris. It's a long shot. He'd pretty much resigned it. But starting behind Max, he had to get ahead to try and keep the championship fight going on, even to Qatar. But he can't try and do the same thing as Leclerc. Verstappen's too good on the traction. The McLaren doesn't have the downforce of the Red Bull. It's got better straight line speed, but he's not able to use that at this stage. And Norris cannot make it past Verstappen, and he never got really another opportunity. But if we go on board with Max, you can see actually the bigger threat came from the man that was alongside Lando into the first corner. That was Yuki Tsunoda in the V-carb. So Tsunoda gets away quite well. Great qualifying from Yuki. But as they come into the first corner, he releases the brakes, trying to fight with Norris on the inside. So he's looking across to Lando. He wants to try and hold it around the outside. And he gets so close to rear-ending Max Verstappen right at this moment. And that could have taken Max out of the race, certainly spun him to the back of the field and just about got away with it. Max can then get on the gas and keep the place from Lando. And all in all, not a particularly momentous start, unlike last year. So Russell leads out of the first corner, but Leclerc's putting him under pressure. And Ferrari, as I said, were the pre-race favourites. Leclerc was very strong in Vegas last year, had pole position, fought for the win, and when barely anyone could fight for the win against Max Verstappen, he put up a good one last year in 2023. And the thought was Ferrari's ability at low-speed corners, their low downforce package is very good, as we saw in Monza, that they would be able to fight for Russell. And over the course of the race, they'd maybe be favourites, particularly once they've dispatched a Gasly in their second and third after the start. But it didn't materialise. And the main thing for that was tyre graining for Ferrari generally, but particularly Leclerc in the first stint. So he goes hunting George Russell in the early laps, cannot make it through, and then has the most dramatic fall off of his tyres, where the fronts just grain up, you start sliding the front axle, balling up the rubber, and you lose contact patch with the asphalt. And this is what it looks in terms of a telemetry trace, a bit of data. You basically, Leclerc in the red, Leclerc in the blue. The blue is before the deg on lap 3. The red is when the tyres are going. And the lap time is going to the tune of 3.6 seconds in a lap. It's absolutely dramatic. And there's nothing you can do from the cockpit. It feels so helpless. And really, where you're really seeing this is on the steering trace up here, in the low-speed corners around here as well, where the red, you can see the spikes just come up higher than the blue, where Charles having to turn the wheel more and just wait with understeer whilst his car rotates through the corner because his front tyres don't have the grip, and that is where your steering is happening. And what it means in terms of your speed is the red comes down much lower than the blue because you have to wait to get on the throttle. And it's just so frustrating. You really can't do much about it once the tyres start graining. So if we have a look at what that actually means on board with Leclerc, you can see this in real time play out. Lap 3 versus lap 8. And here we go. In lap 8, Charles, with a little bit more steering lock on the right-hand side versus the left. And what it means is, on the left, he's able to rotate the car faster than on the right, and he can get on the gas from a straighter position on the exit. But where it's really drastic is coming into the next corner, which is turn 7. Now, this is a left-hander. So in a Formula 1 car or in any road car, you've got the outside front doing the work, where you've got weight transfer pushing the weight onto the outside front. And you can actually see on this right front here, the graining in the middle of that tyre, where it just looks rank, dark tyre, where all of the rubber is just balled up on the surface, and you're losing that nice smooth contact patch. So you're losing efficiency of the tyre, basically. And as Charles turning in now, the right front on this left-hand corner is taking the load, and he's having to turn so much to try and get this rotated. But he's actually over the slip angle now as well, waiting for it to work. On the left, on lap 3, much earlier on, the car's rotated. He's still got some grip. But on the right here, as we play this forward, just look, the car's like a boat. It will not turn for him, and he's almost running off the road at this point before he can turn into the right. So it's just really, really difficult for Leclerc. And that's why he was losing 2-3 seconds a lap in those early laps before finally Ferrari pitted him. But the damage was already done, and he was a long way away from George Russell. And that is what allowed Russell to escape into an unassailable lead, really, in the very first stint. Degradation was big for Ferrari, not for Mercedes. It was also big for McLaren. And Lando Norris had a very subdued race. Oscar Piastri struggled as well. He had a penalty for an incorrect start position, which was very marginal. But you can see Norris having a similar trajectory to Leclerc. McLaren also went for a lower downforce option, as Ferrari did. Mercedes were a little bit more downforce, as were Red Bull. And it allowed the ones with more downforce, Mercedes and Red Bull, to look after their tyres a bit better than the McLaren and the Ferrari. So if we look at this pace between a Mercedes, a Ferrari, a McLaren and a Red Bull, you can see Norris having this huge drop-off in the papaya in the first stint, and then once again the second stint, which pretty much ruled him out of any contention. He had huge drop-off, and he had graining on the medium and then the hard tyre as well. But what really exacerbates this is a couple of things. Firstly, an understeer balance. So if you have a balance that's naturally looking to protect the rear tyres, you want to stop rear sliding. So you don't want to be correcting your rear axle through the corners. You don't want to be having opposite lock. You want to be giving a nice smooth rear axle, getting good traction and looking after those rears. But in turn, that can put more stress on the fronts. And so you've always got this trade-off between your front axle, front wear, front graining if you're sliding, versus the rear. And McLaren generally have a bit more of an understeer balance, and they can protect the rears very well, as we've seen in places like Singapore, where Norris marched off to a big win. But sometimes when it's front limited, they're not actually as competitive. And secondly, you can see Lando pumps in a very fast lap on his very first lap on the second stint here on the hard tyres. And this is to try and get back onto terms and try and gain some of that time that he lost in the first stint. But in doing that, in pushing so hard so soon on a stint, you can actually get the tyres working, trying to overwork when they're not properly in the temperature window, and that can start to grain and slide the tyre as well. And it comes back for Lando for a short time, but then the damage is done, and further on in the stint, it goes very much away from him, and he drops away from the front 5 in the Grand Prix. The interesting thing was the final stint was actually fairly okay for Norris in the McLaren. You see the pace came down to a decent level, matching Hamilton actually in the Mercedes, the fastest car on the track for most of the final stint. So it was possible for him to do a good run. But contrary to what he did on the first run on the hards, the second run, he has a very gentle build-up to the tyre. Goes very slowly for a while, builds it in, and at this point, he's using some tools in the cockpit, using the differential to try and get rid of some understeer and help the front end. And it kind of worked late on, but the damage is done for Norris. And McLaren had a very tough day, losing points to Ferrari. But because Mercedes had such a good day, they didn't lose as many as they might have done. But degradation was certainly the order of the day, particularly in that first stint.